Hello, welcome back to Behind the Faders, the live sound channel. Today I want to talk about low end, because not only is it one of the most frequently asked questions in the coaching calls, many people think that mixing low end is kind of the holy grail. So once you nail the bottom end, everything else will fall into place like magic, which is of course not true. Every frequency range has its challenges. However, when it comes to system engineering, that's where low end is the hardest. Because of the long wavelengths, a lot of reflections, interferences. So creating an even bass coverage in a room, that is one of the hardest things in live audio. So I'm lucky enough to work with some of the best system engineers in this country and have nothing but admiration and respect for these guys. Even though I have a good idea of what they are doing, in fact, I know pretty exactly what they are doing, but still the results that they are achieving still to me seem like magic sometimes. Also, the low end requires the biggest amount of energy from a system because every component has to work hard to put out low end. So manufacturers came up with very innovative ideas over years in order to create strong bottom end. For example, in the 90s, there was a short period, really, just a few years, where they had a thing called servo drive subs. And they look like normal subs, but the speaker was not driven by a magnetic coil, it was driven by a little motor. The idea behind that was, while a conventional loudspeaker has to work harder and harder as frequency went lower, a motor has to do less work when it gets lower because it doesn't have to move so fast. And those things were brutal. I remember the first time I came across them, that was on a festival, and this German hip-hop band brought, I think, 6 of them, stacked them up in front of the stage center. And I saw people throw up in front of these subs. So they were brutal. However, they didn't stay around for long because, well, they were really heavy and really expensive. They broke very often because, a motor needs maintenance, and if you don't give it maintenance, it will fail. The electricity consumption was big, and at the same time, conventional loudspeakers became more and more efficient and better. So after a few years, servo subs were gone. I've never come across one since then. So enough history. So the first thing that you do is you come into a room and there's a system and you listen to it. And you have to find out how much bass the system can even deliver. And try not to overload it. That will not work. It will just distort and you might even break something. So you have to live with what you've got. That might be the system not be very capable of putting out low end. It might also be the room not allow for strong low end, especially if you are like in a tent. A tent is a so-called passive membrane, meaning the walls don't reflect the sound waves, they absorb them. So in a tent you will most of the time have very poor low end unless you have a silly amount of subs. Next thing is EQing that system. You have to decide whether you want to EQ the entire system, bass heavy, or keep it flat and just dial in the sub where you need it. I personally, there's no rules, obviously. It's entirely your own decision. I prefer a flat system and dial in the low end wherever I need it. Subs on aux or not? Meaning, do you feed the subs from your master bus, left and right, or do you feed the subs from an aux end? Now, there's a lot of arguments against subs on an aux, and I've seen 20-minute long videos explain why this is a terrible idea. But for me, the method served well for more years than that person in the video was even on the planet. So I use subs on an aux in most cases. However, not always. My rule is, if it is a genre that requires a very strong low end and at least the drums need to sound very processed, I would go with subs on an aux. If I have a genre where everything is supposed to sound very natural and organic, like folk, jazz, let alone an orchestra, I will go with left and right because in this case I don't need a strong bottom end, I need a natural bottom end. And at least for me, this is easier to achieve with left and right. Now, in a normal band setup, you will have a kick that goes into the subs, maybe this, the biggest floor tom, a bass guitar, and then maybe some keyboard sounds or some playback tracks, stuff like that. So the first thing you have to decide is, and this is also genre dependent, what instrument you want to occupy the low-lows between the kick and the bass. Leave the other signals aside for now. Because in normal rock pop music, it will be the kick drum occupying the very low frequencies and the bass comes in above it. However, if you're working with reggae type of genres, then usually the bass guitar will sit underneath of the kick drum. When you try to find the right punch point for the kick drum, and you might have a certain vision of how you want it to sound, but again, you have to see what the system can deliver. If you want to be very efficient, and maybe the system is already kind of on the edge, this is a good moment for listening with your eyes. Because you will have a prepared EQ for the kick drum, just bypass that for a second and switch on the RTA. Usually every desk nowadays, I think, has an RTA function. And look where the kick drum has its natural punch point and then use that frequency. Because if you go a lot below that, then the problem is you sending a lot of hot air through the entire system. Put a lot of pressure on it with no audio information whatsoever. The biggest example for that is, again, Metallica. I don't know how the new guy handles it, but with Big Mick, he always wanted to have a ridiculous amount of subs because he knew he would blow a lot of hot air into that system just in order to achieve this massive low end. As I once asked him if he could bypass the kick drum EQ for me just for a second, and he did, and well, night and day is not the word. But anyway, if you need to be efficient or you want to be efficient, then just choose the natural punch point of that kick drum. The bass then usually sits a little bit above it. If it kind of leaks down into the low lows, then you just have to listen. Does it work or not? So it's not a must that you cut off the bass guitar above that punch point of the kick drum. And recently somebody asked me if I do the sidechain thing between kick and bass. What that is, you put a multiband compressor on the bass channel and you just use the lowest area of that multiband and you set the center frequency to the same frequency where the kick drum hits with the low punch point. And now you sidechain that compressor from the kick drum channel. So every time the kick drum hits, it carves a hole into the EQ of the bass to make space. My answer was no, I never do that. I rather EQ stuff in a way that it sits in the mix nicely. Because, of course, this technique comes from studio productions. If you want this really big, impressive, consistent low end in the studio productions, you sometimes do that. It might not work on each kick hit. There might be parts of the song where it sounds weird, but in the studio you can just automate those parts where it doesn't work. In live sound you can't do that. So you might end up hearing weird artifacts and things during the show going on in the low lows, and you can't really pinpoint what it is, and then it's probably your sidechain. But then the other thing I told the guy, I never do it, but try it. Check it out. Feel free. When it comes to all the other signals that might have some low-end information, then it's hard to give you a general rule. You have to listen. So there might be keyboard sounds, sub-synth sounds. There might be, like I said, playback tracks that have low-end information in them. You have to listen. It might work just like that, or it might not. But I would say if it sounds good in general, but you have a little bit of too much low-end build-up on certain notes that, for example, a keyboard is playing, then I would leave it in. I wouldn't sacrifice a good sound in an entire show for some seconds where it doesn't sound ideal. And that is already everything I wanted to tell you about low end. Like always, if you have questions or comments, leave them in the comment section. If you have a lot of questions, consider booking yourself a coaching call. Or if you know somebody else who might need some help along the way, maybe give him a coaching call for Christmas. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It's just a click for you, totally free and so helpful for me. I'll see you around. Bye-bye.